Right here. Again, I'll repeat myself. My name is Art McAfee. I'm from the Santa Fe Council on International Relations and a member of the National Board. And I have the great fortune to introduce our distinguished panel this afternoon. I would refer you to the bios in your program because they're very impressive, but I will not read those. But we have a discussion we hope to pull off today to talk about U.S. economic power after this crisis that we've been through, how the decisions made in Washington are going to affect the D2, T2, and that's deficits, debt, trade, taxes. And with the current situation, it might be D squared, T squared, because economists like the formulas. But anyway, first of all, we have Alan Murray, who's the moderator for the panel. He's on your left. He is the deputy managing editor of the Wall Street Journal and also the executive editor for their online version. He's previously been in Washington as CNBC's DC bureau chief, and you probably recognize him from being on TV. And prior to that, he was bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal in Washington. We have Jared Bernstein on, these are in a different order than I expected. Anyway, Jared is a senior fellow at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. Raise your hand, Jared. And he previously served as Joe Biden's chief economist and economic advisor. And he's also an on-air commentator for CNBC and MSNBC. You probably recognize him. Donald Kohn has served as vice chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System from 2006 to 2010. And interestingly, he's now been recently appointed by the government of the United Kingdom and the Bank of England to serve on their interim financial policy committee. Lindsey served as assistant to the president and director of National Economic Council at the White House and was the chief economic advisor to President George W. Bush. He's been a governor of the Federal Reserve System, taught at Harvard, done lots of things. Deborah WInce-Smith is the president and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness, and she's also a Senate-confirmed member of the Oversight Board of the Internal Revenue Service and the State Department's Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy. And being from New Mexico, I noted in her resume that she also had oversight of the national labs at Santa Fe and Los Alamos, and Lawrence Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley. With that, I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and I look forward to a stimulating discussion.
Good. Thank you very much. So one reason that I have been successfully married to the same wonderful woman for the last 27 years is because we specialize in our relationship. She won't ever let me cook, which is probably a good thing. But anything that has to do with the dogs, I have to do. And similarly, when it comes to public policy, she does foreign policy and I do economic policy. But what's been interesting about the last 24 hours is the degree to which all the people who have spoken here feel like the two have merged into one. Steve Hadley began the day today by saying that economic leadership is absolutely key to foreign policy leadership, and American foreign policy leadership is the key to a stable world. I'm simplifying a little bit, but that's what journalists do. And I think we've heard similar themes from Rick Levin last night and from the political speakers this morning. So this is a panel where we're really going to dive in to the economic situation, do a little bit of prognostication about the future, but also talk about what needs to happen to maintain the economic leadership that Steve Hadley was talking about. And I want to start by asking each of our panelists to look forward both over the short term, next 3 years, and over the medium to long term, next 10 years. Say how they see the economy right now for the next 3 years and for the next 10 years, and what they see as the one biggest challenge that the U.S. economy faces in each of those time periods. And John, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this great panel. I think the next 2 or 3 years, I'm afraid it's probably going to be a very slow recovery from this very deep recession. We're working through a lot of problems, not only of our own making, but that come at us from outside across the Atlantic Ocean. Some of these problems are coming at us from a lot of our own making. I think we can expect growth, not recession, but slow growth, and gradually work our way through these issues. I suspect by the time we get down through 4, we'll have identified a number of things that need to happen, and if these things happen, we have a better outlook. So let me start with the 3-year thing, and I will identify fiscal policy. I think it's absolutely essential that our elected representatives, and I would include both sides of the aisle and both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, get their act together and find some middle way of getting control of our federal deficit and the growth path of federal debt over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. I think the lack of a medium-term strategy for U.S. fiscal policy is a serious problem for the U.S. economy in the next 2 or 3 years. It has 2 effects. One is a great deal of uncertainty. How is one supposed to plan as a household or a business if you don't know what the tax system is going to look like, and you don't know what the government's support for yourself in your retirement, medical, or retirement savings is going to be? That kind of uncertainty holds back people from making decisions that might move the economy forward. The second adverse effect, I think, not having a medium-term plan, medium-longer-term plan is having, is that the only way the politicians have of demonstrating to the public that they understand that there's a problem and something needs to happen about it is to have near-term tightness in the budget and to have a near-term restraint in the budget sector, in the federal budget. And I worry that if we don't have a medium-term plan, as these tax cuts and other stimulus measures expire at the end of this year and then at the end of next year, they won't be renewed, and we will have very substantial fiscal drag on the economy. I don't think it's true. Some people argue that restraining federal budgets are helpful to the economy. I think over time we need to do it. We're risking a serious accident if we don't. But I think the near-term effects of fiscal restraint are negative, and just look over to Europe and you can see lots of countries where that's happening. The second, on the 10-year thing, I think our outlook for 10 years, if we can fix the next few years, the outlook for 10 years is pretty good. We have to have reliance on a market economy, on free and open markets. Innovation and resilience in the United States, and some of my colleagues on the panel will talk about that, can be remarkable if it's given the scope and people have the confidence to bet on the future, take those risks and take those chances. I think the single biggest, so I think our 10-year outlook is better if we can fix some of these problems. Our single biggest issue, and this will come as no surprise to you after the talk you heard last night, the single biggest issue is education. What do we need to fix to prepare for the rest of this century? We need to educate our kids so they can get those high-skilled jobs, have that productivity that will keep the U.S. productive and competitive in the global economy, bring the jobs back here. The economic evidence is overwhelming. The returns to higher education are still quite good. You go on in education and it's a good investment, but we need to have our folks be qualified and be motivated to go on in higher education. We need more skills to suit our population for the jobs of the rest of this century.
Sure. I think the next 3 years will be a time for monetary and fiscal policy to work together to continue to build a bridge over the chasm of the huge demand contraction we've had. The bursting of the housing bubble and the ensuing deleveraging cycle both in terms of the household and the corporate sector, as well as financial institutions, has led this to be an extremely deep and protracted recession. And in the last quarter, when GDP went up 2.5%, everyone was all excited, and it was certainly good to see growth and trend. But all that does is keep the unemployment rate where it is. That's not fast enough to make it come down. By the way, with that last GDP report, the level of real GDP was finally back to where it was before the Great Recession. It took 15 quarters to get there. The average length it takes to get back to the prior peak is 5 quarters. So it took 3 times as long just to regain the peak, not to mention all the output that was lost if you compare where we are to where we would be absent the downturn. So the next 3 years are about getting the balance of monetary and fiscal stimulus going in the right direction. Some of Don's former pals have been doing, I think, yeoman's work in terms of getting interest rates low. But Bernanke said last night a very interesting quote in a talk he gave yesterday. He said, in so many words, it's not a quote, but in so many words, he really did say, we've kind of done our part. Perhaps we should do more, but we're doing our part. What we really need is the Congress to do their part. He really said that, and I think he's exactly right, because I think absent more demand in the system, more customers going into businesses, more orders in factories, more projects for investors that might have a net present value positive. Absent that, the low interest rates just don't have the traction they need. It's fine to have low interest rates. It's great. If the housing market were not experiencing such a dismal overhang, I'm sure people would be tapping that exit ramp from recession. But that ramp is blocked because demand is so weak. So there's a sequencing here. We have to worry about fiscal policy to generate the demand, the orders, the customers, such that people will then take advantage of the low interest rates. So that's the next 3 years. The other part of the next 3 years, Don took us most of the way there, so I can be brief here, is getting on a sustainable budget path. I'll say, I have a lot to say about this, but I don't want to, I hope we can get back to it. I don't want to take too much time from my colleagues. I will tell you one fact, though. In order for the debt to GDP ratio to be stable, not rising, which is kind of the first goal of a sustainable budget, to get the debt to GDP ratio stable as opposed to going up every year, the budget has to be in primary balance, which means a deficit of about 3% of GDP. Right now it's about 8.5. If the Bush tax cuts were to sunset, by the end of the 10-year budget cycle, that deficit would be in primary balance. It would be about 3% of GDP. If the Bush tax cuts do not sunset, if they continue to be extended, it will be over 6% of GDP. So that should tell you a little something about that. Over the 10-year span, let me tell you a statistic that guides my answer to Alan's question about our biggest challenges over the 10-year span. Every decade, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, every single decade for which we have data, going back to the 1950s, employment grew by 20 to 30%. Employment grew by 20 to 30% every decade. I'm going business cycle peak to peak, so that's the way you're supposed to do it. 20 to 30%. In the business cycle expansion of the 2000s, 2000 to 2007, employment grew by 4%. 4%. This is our challenge. I have a couple of, if this is the new normal, we have a huge problem/challenge ahead of us. 2 solutions that I'd like to offer, and again, I'm not going to belabor them now in the interest of time. We've talked about internet, and part of this session was dubbed to do with international deficits. It's not sustainable to consume 6% more than we produce based on borrowing from abroad. That's the current account deficit at the end of the last expansion. More balanced trade has to be part of that solution. And I'm quite convinced, and I can hit you with some evidence if we have time as to why, that the extent of unbalanced trade, and especially import penetration from low-wage, aggressive, mercantilist exporters who manage their currency, I'm thinking of China here, were one reason for that. I'm a free trader, and currency management is inconsistent with free trade. I also think, and I'll stop with this point, one reason we had such lousy employment growth in the 2000s has to do with what you hear from this Occupy Wall Street movement. We really have had a very sharp concentration of income at the top of the scale. And if growth is not broadly shared, recoveries are just much less robust. We need a middle class. Henry Ford discovered this a long time ago. We need a middle class whose incomes are growing. They don't have to be growing in lockstep with productivity, but you can't have what you had in the 2000s, where the middle class actually lost ground in the expansion. Not just in the recession, but as the economy grew, the middle class got nowhere. And that is a key ingredient of a lousy business cycle expansion. So more broadly shared growth is also a key to the future.
Okay, so we're some different themes developing here. And over the 10-year period, Don was very clear in saying education is the challenge. And Jared, you were focusing on aggressive trade agreements and measures to bolster the middle class or reduce inequality. In the short term, though, I want to make sure I understand the similarities and differences. Both of you agree that we need fiscal stimulus yoked to longer-term fiscal restraints. We have to do both, and we have to do both now. I did detect some difference in emphasis. Don, you were mostly talking about being careful not to take away the fiscal stimulus we already have. Jared, you seem to be talking about significantly more.
Right. I don't think it's enough to keep our foot where it is on the accelerator. I think we have to push it down.
What are you talking about? Like another $1 trillion fiscal stimulus plan?
You know, I think the president's jobs bill of $450 billion is a great start.
$450 billion. And Don, how do you feel about a $450 billion additional fiscal stimulus plan?
Well, my first priority, as you said, would be not to allow fiscal restraint to kick in next year as the payroll tax cut expires, that sort of thing. If we could do that in the context, I'd be concerned about doing that without doing the longer-term fiscal planning. I'm just afraid that at some point there's going to be an accident in these financial markets.
So if I could convince you that we had a sustainable budget plan that all sides were agreed on, we're deep in fantasy land here now. Would you agree to the American Job Act?
I would agree to some sort of stimulus if there and there was a real commitment that I thought future Congresses would.
I'm stipulating that point. I'm just saying if we have that, I just kind of a thought experiment.
Okay, Larry, I suspect you will widen the divergence a bit.
Maybe. I don't know if there's that much disagreement here. I mean, I can dispense with the 3 and 10 year easily. It's called soggy and soggy. We've been on the longest continuous credit.
3 years and 10 years, both soggy.
Soggy.
Is that an economist term?
It's very, we learned it at Harvard. A lot of people say we're all wet up there, and it's soggy. The reason is that we're at the ending of what has been a fairly continuous credit expansion that started in the 30s, the war, and then housing, and what have you. Debt to GDP ratios are high. Borrowing to GDP, deficit to GDP ratios are high. Private sector, public sector. Private sector has begun the deleveraging process. The public sector has made up for the deleveraging in the private sector by increasing its leverage. And that's, in those situations, economic history is very clear that what you have is you are going to be hit at some point with a period of forced deleveraging. We're going through it now. Lots of other countries have done it, and usually what you get is soggy growth. The real question is how well do you handle it? And here I think, although we tend to be macroeconomists, we don't necessarily disagree that much on the numbers, I think what we need to do in this town is start talking quality and not quantity. Because we can talk about 400 billion here and 500 billion there and 820 billion there, or what have you. We've done it all. But we haven't thought too hard about the kind of rate of return society gets on the money it spends. And this is both on the spending side, it's on the tax side, it's on the regulatory side. For example, we talk a lot about infrastructure. I am for more infrastructure. OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, found that the U.S. actually spends about the same percentage of GDP on infrastructure as other developed countries. Why do we have crappy infrastructure? The answer is things like federal contracting rules. We have the most cumbersome rules that do nothing but drive up costs. You know, here in this town, we have a great example. We're building a convention center, new convention center. And believe it or not, the DC City Council and the Washington Post agreed. The U.S. Labor Department is needlessly driving up the cost of the D.C. Convention Center by the regulations, the contracting rules they're putting involved. We do the same thing for every road construction project in the country. Look, what we have to do is the same that any business would do, that any household would do, faced with the same circumstances. We try and get at least the same amount for less. Hopefully you get more for less. But that focuses on quality, not quantity. Now, the administration, at least the White House, made a very good decision recently. It was the day we got the 0 monthly job increase report. I think they had to do something. Out came the ozone rules. Now, I've been in administrations for the last 30 years. And one thing you should know is a lot of the single-purpose regulators we have out there are single-purpose regulators. They're not told weigh costs and benefits. In fact, it's illegal. It is illegal under a lot of bills to use cost-benefit analysis. Imagine your congressman or your past congressman at some time actually voted for a bill that made it illegal to use cost-benefit analysis in considering regulation. It is preposterous. It is bizarre. So we've done it. So in the case of the ozone rules, here was its best attainable standards. Okay? Now, under the ozone rules, to show you, I just want to give this example.
Okay, you're getting to the one
getting to the
challenge.
point. The one challenge is we have got to start focusing on quality, not quantity. In the ozone rules, Yellowstone Park failed the ozone test EPA was proposing. You know, out there where the bears live and everything. That failed. By its own estimates, EPA said this would cost $60 billion a year forever. That is the equivalent of 600,000 jobs. I mean, who on earth would come up with such a rule? It so miserably failed the cost-benefit test that even the White House couldn't let it out the door, okay? But this happens hundreds and hundreds of times. We need cost-benefit analysis. We need rate of return consideration on all federal projects, on the tax rules, and on regulations. We've got to go there. That will solve our problems. That will take care of the deficit in the country.
So just one question about that before we go on to Deborah. Many of your economist colleagues argue that this is a demand problem, not a supply problem, and that we cured the problems of the 1930s through World War II when we bought bombers. The economic productivity of that investment was zero, but it created jobs and created demand and lifted us out of the economy. So in other words, they're saying it is quantity, not quality. What do you say to that argument?
Well, let's think about that carefully. Suppose I don't care whether I tax it away or borrow it away. If I take $1 away from the private sector, where it gets a 3 or 4% real return, and I make it to the government, and the government, let's be generous, gets a 1% return on its money, the country is poor.
But the argument right now is you're borrowing it, and you're not taking it away from the private sector because of the
So I very much disagree with that analysis, so I hope we actually have to get back to that.
So wait, I want to take your money, Jared. I'll tell you what.
I don't like that part either.
No. Oh, but that's why the public doesn't like what you're proposing, right? Because what we need to do, if we're going to get richer, every single dollar available in this society needs to be put to work at the highest rate of return possible. The private sector has done that. We have done a great job.
This is the soggy Harvard thinking.
We'll come back to that argument. Let's get Deborah's points on the table first.
Well, the first thing on the near term, projecting 3 years out, I think we are going to have low, sluggish growth. I think our unemployment's going to continue to be high, hopefully not as high as it has been. We're going to see the U.S. private sector continue to be more productive. You know, we've had great productivity numbers. And they are going to continue to invest outside of the United States. And the wealth generation will be outside of this country. Right now, during this period, 2009 data, U.S. corporations, which are real now global enterprises, produce 3 times the revenue outside the United States of all U.S. exports. And they will continue not to bring the trillions of dollars in profit back in this country to invest. So in the near term, what do we need to do? Well, it's the triple whammy. We have to accelerate the deficit reduction. We've got to curb the entitlement growth. And we have to have money to invest in our future here, on which our national security depends. So the immediate things we need to do, and my colleagues have mentioned it, we have to get a certainty on what this path for deficit reduction, entitlement curbing is. Once that's done, and not everybody's going to like it, there will be certainty and less volatility for the business community, and they like that. They want to know what the rules are. And two, the immediate things we can do in the near term, and this can be done, is one, repatriate all of this money that's being earned outside the United States by U.S. firms so they can invest here, move to a territorial tax system so the money can come back, not be double taxed. Two, get a corporate tax rate that's about 20% average in line with the rest of the OECD. It's ridiculous for us to have almost the highest in the world. And then the third piece that we need to do is begin to accelerate our trade leadership on the long term.
Just before you do the short term, so no, in terms of short-term stimulus, really all you're arguing is repatriating earnings. You're not arguing for fiscal stimulus.
I'm arguing to get a plan on deficit reduction. I mean, on the stimulus, the extent to which we can continue to invest in our R&D and some of those things will be great, but I think these massive stimulus programs are not the answer right now.
Okay, long term.
Okay, long term. We have to move to a capital cost structure that focuses on production and savings. We have to get rid of this incredible regulatory burden that we are unique in the world of having. I mean, 14% right now of GDP goes into the cost of regulation. If you look at every small business, the average cost per employee of their federal regulatory burden is $28,000. We've got the highest percentage of GDP in the world on product liability tort payout, about 2.2% of GDP. We've got to get that off the books because it is a huge drag. The other long-term thing we need to do is we have to assert our leadership in the global trading system in two very powerful ways. One, the U.S. and Europe made a terrible mistake, in my view and others, of letting China in particular, but the other BRICS, come into the WTO and not be part of the government procurement code. You know, all the indigenous innovation, all the inability of our firms to really participate in these huge growth markets. In the case of China, you know, they are not part of government procurement, so they can do whatever they want on that front. We need a global investment treaty because trade is no longer cross-border, it's complex logistics supply chains. And then the final thing we need to do in the long term is really revitalize the concept that manufacturing and services are wealth creators. It's not just a service economy. We have to make things in a new 21st century way, or ultimately we will not produce the wealth, we will not have the jobs, we will not have the R&D that enables us to be a wealthy country.
Okay, we've got a lot of things on the table now, short term and long term. And not a lot of time to talk about it, but I want to go back to the short term here for just a minute, because I think we've got two members of the panel who are saying fiscal stimulus, or Don, in your case at least, not fiscal drag. And we have two members of the panel who are focusing very much on the regulatory environment and the effects that has. And Jerry, you were getting ready to jump in on this.
Yeah, I mean, just, right. Do you want to go first?
We hear this every day, right? Business says the reason the economy is stagnating is because of an anti-business climate, a regulatory climate that keeps us from.
That's actually not what businesses say. That's what their representatives say here in Washington. The actual poll businesses themselves, far and away, they say the largest problem they have right now is poor sales or weak demand. That's a fact. I can show you the data.
In the U.S., maybe, but not globally.
I'm talking about the U.S. So, look, there's so many things to jump in on here. You want to start and then I'll go?
Go ahead, start it.
Sorry. Let me just start with where Larry and I have a very stark disagreement. Before Keynes, it was thought that, like Larry,
Keynesian.
Well,
I'm not arguing with the debate that.
on this issue, you are way out of Keynesian land, at least as I see it. But you'll have to explain to me where I'm wrong. Let me finish, and then tell me. I'll give you a chance. The idea that a dollar spent by the public sector is a dollar taken away from the private sector and spent less efficiently, because I actually agree that the public will, in general, be a less efficient spender of that dollar, is exactly what kept policymakers sitting on their hands during the Great Recession. In fact, during every downturn, until people understood that because savings equals investment in economic identities, savings doesn't transform into investments magically when you're in a downturn. In fact, we've got trillions of dollars sitting on the sidelines, idly not doing anything. At a time like that, it's essential for the government to get into the role of investor, spender, consumer temporarily. It's got to be temporary for fiscal reasons, temporarily, until the private sector gets back on the map.
Let Larry respond.
No argument. I'm just saying if you're going to do that, let's at least get value for money.
Well, that is unquestionably correct. I mean,
So you're in favor of further fiscal stimulus?
I'm
Jared was talking about $500 billion.
Well, I think I would echo what Don said, and let's decide how we want to spend $400 or $500 billion. If you simply,
If we give you control.
definitely, but I think we have to be. That's why I think we have to be careful, and I think we need to move on both fronts. I don't think you're going to find a lot of disagreement here on the need for a long-term fiscal consolidation. Having the emphasis be on phasing it over time, not doing it right away. But what I'm saying is that to accomplish that, we need to do it by also looking at quality. If I may just give one more example, and we all know it, and we'll pick on defense. Look, you can add to defense, you can cut defense. I will tell you exactly what will happen if you add or cut. Will the money be going to where it will have the biggest payoff for national security? No. What's going to happen is that adding or subtracting from national defense will be roughly equally allocated by a formula among the services. Because that's how the Pentagon works. That's the Pentagon. It's not a partisan thing. It's always worked that way. That's how the Hill works. That's stupid, folks. I mean, come on. Let's start focusing on quality and getting more.
Let me move on, because we got a lot of ground to cover here in a pretty short period of time, and go to the fiscal consolidation. Now, we have sort of general agreement among the four of you on fiscal consolidation, because we haven't begun to talk about the details of that consolidation. At the extremes, there are two ways you can do it. One is you can do it entirely on the spending side and maintain a federal government that's something less than 20% of the economy. The other is you can do it largely on the tax side and see the federal government with the current entitlement growth go to something more approaching 30% of the economy. So if entirely on the tax side is, these are not value judgments, is 1, and entirely on the spending side is 10, where do we need to be, Dr. Kohn?
5. So I mean, I really think the great compromise. I really think we need to come at this from both ends. Both of them. So
no, I'll take a 5. That's a good answer.
Yes. So the entitlements our elected representatives, people we voted for over time, promised us, our kids, and our grandkids more than us, our kids, and our grandkids want to pay for. And that they overpromised in order to get elected in the short run, and we didn't punish them for it because we were enjoying the largesse.
Yeah.
And so that's got to stop. I mean, that's unsustainable. And I think something on the entitlement side, and also, though, I think we can do on tax, and with tax reform, I think we can stop subsidizing my purchase of a second home. I don't see why. I mean, I love it that I have a mortgage and I deduct the mortgage interest, but that's not in the public.
How about
Jared, 1 to 10.
5 with an asterisk. And the asterisk.
Which way does the asterisk point?
The asterisk. I'm going to tell you. The asterisk, not an arrow, it doesn't point. The asterisk takes me to the point that we've already cut about $900 billion on the spending side. So 5, accounting for the fact that the Budget Control Act cuts $900 billion from the discretionary spending. Oh yeah, you're looking.
No, I'm looking at your baseline.
No,
That's right.
Yeah, this is a baseline.
That's the baseline.
Baseline we use.
Yeah, no, I think it's widely accepted.
So you're
from an
willing to accept the
baseline,
fine and find it out on the
yes.
baseline. Yeah. Larry.
4, 5, something like that. Again, I think, here, let me correct.
Let me just ask you though before you go. What do you say when you see in one of the Republican debates, the candidates across the board were asked if Congress came to you with a 9-to-1 package, or a 10-to-1 package, $10 of spending cuts for every $1 in tax increase, would you accept it? And to a man and woman, they said no.
Well, as you asked the Democratic Congress, the same question, right? Nancy Pelosi, they would, flip the question around, it's the same thing. Speaker Pelosi said she's against cutting entitlements. Everyone up here knows we have to cut entitlements. Anyone who's looked at the budget knows we do. But that's why they run an ad, right? That shows Paul Ryan pushing Granny. It was a great ad. Did you make it up? Paul Ryan pushing Granny in a wheelchair toward a cliff. Remember this ad? And dumping her off the cliff. It was a great ad, right? Fabulous ad. But come on, folks. Everyone here knows
That was a 5. I want to remind you.
Yeah,
So we all agree some degree with the
but what I'm trying to remind you is that both parties are playing this game,
Right.
because that's what the parties are
Okay,
there.
so the answer is, in your view, the answer is 4.
Sure, but quality. If I may give one more example.
You're saying the same thing as Don's saying in terms of tax reform. How you do it on the tax side matters.
Yeah. Well, Medicaid. Okay. Most of you have children. So think about your kids' allowance. Okay. Suppose you told your kids, you can spend what you want and I'll pay for 80% of it. Okay. You will get one outcome. If you give your kids $50 a week or whatever you want to give them, and you say, you spend it, no more, you will get a different outcome. Okay. You can figure out which one is going to involve more spending. So let's think about what we do on Medicaid. We have a deal. States, you can spend what you want, and we'll pay for half of it. And the state of New York got very, very clever. This is Albany. Albany said, hey, I don't want to have all of our half come from the state. Let's push half of it onto the county. Is there anyone here, New Yorker? Is anyone here, New Yorker? Okay. You know what? You live in suburban New York? You know what your property taxes are like in suburban New York? That's because they're paying for Medicaid. Because Albany wants to be able to spend 25-cent dollars. Now, the 25 cents is raised by somebody else, and 50 cents is raised here in Washington. Okay? As a result, New York is 6.1% of the country's population, is 8.2% of Medicaid beneficiaries, and spends 13% of all the Medicaid money. Why? Because the folks who have wrote the rules are incentivized to spend 25-cent dollars. How much smarter it would be to give them the $50 a week option on the allowance? That's a common sense reform.
Deborah, 1 to 10, and then we're going to talk about your export issue.
Well, I'd be in the 4 to 5, but I want to add a little different flavor to the conversation. One, we really have to ensure that all Americans are contributing to the tax base. I mean, as you heard, I'm on the IRS Oversight Board. And one of the things that most people don't know is that only 48% of Americans are paying any tax now. And we are increasingly moving to a under-the-counter cash economy that's consistent with developing countries, which is bad. We have a very conservative estimate of close to $1 trillion in the tax gap, what we should be collecting, what we're not. And guess where most of it is? In small and medium-sized businesses that are our growth generation, where our entrepreneurship comes. So we got to figure that problem out as well. So on the tax...
Wait, I'm a little confused. So you want them to pay their fair share, but then you're worried that that will discourage innovation?
No, the opposite. What I'm saying is, if you're a small and medium-sized business and you are not declaring and paying your taxes, you can't grow. You can't access debt and equity capital. And the fact that the people that don't have classic W-2s are the ones not paying their fair share is a very serious issue for entrepreneurship. So we need to ensure that we broaden the tax base as one of the issues to go forward. And then the other, on the quality issue, however you want to talk about it, you can look at the defense issue. And if you do these things just across the board versus surgically, we're going to have very bad outcomes. Our defense budget, our expenditures have led to some of the greatest technological innovation in the world. We have huge challenges in cybersecurity, in supercomputing and things. And if we cut back in that, those are smart uses of stimulus money, including education. So we got to be smart about this.
Okay, so now, now you focus on export industries, Jared. You talked about the importance of building back the middle class. What we're talking about is a world where American consumers have sort of been the drivers of the global economy for 3 decades by spending more than they could afford to spend. And now we're entering a world where that can't happen anymore. And the only way for that kind of a world to work is for us to export more and hopefully in the process of exporting more, build up a middle class, and that's where your education issue comes in. So I want to ask each of you quickly, and then we'll open it up to questions. But can we make that turn? What is the biggest challenge? And Don, in your case, I may be asking you to be redundant, but is it really possible after 3 decades of kind of a consumer-oriented economy to become a Germany, an export powerhouse, and build up a middle class again that's driving those exports? And Deborah, go ahead.
Well, I think it is. First of all, it's not about classic exports just crossing borders. Things are made in these very complex chains. The issue is what part of the value chain and investment occurs in this country and what's the high value work that's done. That's where the education comes in and the skilled workforce. We're going to see lots of other jobs created around the export engine and manufacturing enterprise, not just the classical 1950 working on an assembly line. When you go to some of the places in the country where this is happening, whether it's Deere, Caterpillar, parts of our auto, we are making things the best quality in the world. Rolls-Royce is making some of their best stuff in Norway. It's not about low wages, it's all that. It's understanding that we have a capital and regulatory system that enables this. The other thing that relates to the export engine is we have to deal with the intellectual property issue because a huge amount of the value is in that. And those are huge issues that impact particularly China and the rest of the world.
You're saying China needs to honor intellectual property rights?
Well, their laws say they do, but the fact of it is their behaviors are such. I mean, we have an estimate that, if they just enforce the laws, the value of that to U.S. export would create close to 1 million jobs. I mean, this is a really serious issue.
I heard the word education. Let me throw it some more words. We're spending $11,000 per pupil on K through 12 education. $11,000 per pupil. That is more than any European country. We are getting much worse results for it. What would you do? Oh, let's leave it the same way and let's make it $12,000 per pupil. Is that a sensible policy, folks? No.
I detect a theme coming through your comments.
Look, both my parents were public school teachers. My uncles, my aunts were public school teachers. I thought they'd think I was supposed to be a public school teacher, and instead I disappointed them.
Don't we have the same problem in healthcare? We spend more than everybody else and get worse out.
Absolutely. Let's start focusing on quality, folks.
Yeah, Jared.
Well, I'm against quality. No. Well, for quality, I think it's a lot easier to say than to prescribe how you get there, particularly in education and probably healthcare. We could do better.
Probably healthcare we could do better.
No, I'm saying whereas quality, I think that solving the quality issues in education are tougher than solving the quality issues in healthcare.
I see.
That's my view. Now, I'm sorry. The specific question to speak to right here is
what do you think we need if you accept the basic framework that we have to export more?
Oh, okay, that's
the next 10 years. What's the way to get us there?
I don't like the way you put the question, my good friend. And the reason I say that is because, and I am a former employee and a huge, unabashed fan of the President of the United States. But I don't like the way he says this either, and I told him so. It's not just export, it's net exports. We can export all we want. If we're continuing to suck in more and more and more and more imports, we're going to have unbalanced trade, and we're going to be back where we started. So I'm all about exporting, but I think the key metric here is the net. And I think, look, to me, the currency issue is huge. Now, I don't know if this is an accurate...
When you say things like that, some people accuse you of some of the things you've said here. Some people say, boy, it sounds like he's dancing dangerously close to protection.
Well, let me just say that I think it's the opposite. And I said, I mentioned free trade before. I happen to believe that currency value should be set in free markets. What's protectionist about that? If anything, it's absolutely clear to me, and any other trade economist you talk to, that to manage your currency to get an export advantage is subsidizing your exports and inconsistent with free trade.
But if you say the way you deal with that is to slap tariffs on Chinese goods until they fix their currency manipulation.
There's a lot of ways to deal with it, and I'm not sure I have the best answer, but you've got to be dealing with it. I actually like the China currency bill that's passed the Senate, got 99 Republican votes at the last time. So this is the only bipartisan bill in this town, folks, and it got out of the Senate. Nothing gets out of the Senate.
Don, you like that bill?
Not particularly. I'm concerned about tariff wars, etc.
Well, that's not,
but I do.
It's just,
right.
I mean, I just came back from China when I raised the issue, since we have two central bankers here. When I raised the issue of currency manipulation, they said, well, what is QE1 and QE2? What, isn't that currency manipulation?
I'd say baloney. So I think that currency manipulation is where you go in and purchase the currency and you just buy it and manipulate the currency market, and that's what China is doing. And that's what other Asian countries are being really forced to do because they're trading so much with China, and they can't allow their currencies to vary that much relative to the renminbi. So I think the Federal Reserve is going in and buying treasury bonds and agency bonds in order to stimulate economic activity in the United States. A side effect of that is that it puts some, not much, but some downward pressure on the exchange rate. That's the way monetary policy has always worked. When I joined the Federal Reserve in 1970, we were constructing models that had three channels for monetary policy: an interest rate, a wealth, and an exchange rate channel. There is nothing new about QE2 relative to the way monetary policy has always been practiced. It is not currency manipulation. I was on a panel this summer in France, to tell the truth, and it was about, to quote, the currency wars. I expected to be on the defensive. But a Mexican was on the panel. He talked before me, and he said, is this a currency war? Weapons are only being used by one party, the Chinese. The others have disarmed.
So what do you do about it? How do you get the Chinese to stop it?
I don't know. I think
But not the Schumer bill. Not counter, not tariffs.
I worry about.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is a way, and I think it's a self-inflicted. It's called border adjustability. What happens now is when the Germans ship a car here, it gets a 19% of value rebate to BMW. When one of our cars lands in Germany, it gets a 19% tax imposed upon it. That's a 38% margin, okay? And Deborah, I know you mentioned the word that tax, right, value-added tax. You mentioned the word territoriality, and that's where I know the business community wants to go. I don't think that matters. Territoriality taxes what you produce here. If you tax what you produce here and do it at a high rate, you're going to discourage production in America.
So
what we should do is we should scrap income-based taxation and go to value-added based taxation, because that is a legal way of border adjustability. And that means all those Chinese goods are going to be, we are now going to start taxing them at 19% when they land there.
I'm going to open this up.
No, it's not a tariff, and that's the difference. It is not a tariff.
It's a value-added tax and it's accepted under GAAP, but
no, but I'm just saying, you jump all over me when I talk about countervailing duties. He's talking about stopping a 19% incoming tax, call it that, call it a tariff.
No, but it's not, but
okay, but
it's not.
Here's the tax. But Larry, here's the question.
It's a leveling.
Larry, here's the question. You've already agreed on a number 4 solution to the fiscal deficit. How about getting your part of the deficit package from an add-on VAT tax?
No,
Yeah, well, why?
because why would you make us, why would you add more costs of doing business here? You don't want to do that. We can do a substitute VAT. There are ways of making it a two-tier VAT to add progressivity, and I don't want to get into the wonky details here. It's very easy to accomplish. But what we need to do is the most efficient tax. It is a quality-oriented change in our tax.
Quick time story, then I'll open up to a couple of questions.
So I was recently in China, visited all their supercomputing facilities. That's a story to tell. But in meeting with some former Chinese officials, and they were in their 80s, they all had their dyed hair, and it was very interesting, very formal. We're talking about the new 12 5-year plan. And I said to them, you know, what is your real concern going forward? They said, we're terrified about not having enough food. And the issue about the difference between urbanization and the rural thing. Well, look at now we do subsidize agriculture. I think we should get rid of that. But the fact is, the United States and Brazil are the two largest food producers and exporters in the world. We deal with great productivity, high quality, high efficiency. This is an export. It doesn't employ a lot of people, but the whole value system around it is really, really great. So the other real story about China that was amusing on this issue of the tax, I said to them, you know, we're very concerned in the United States about, you know, the hollowing out of Detroit and, you know, that whole infrastructure, which led the industrial world at one time. Think of that, the Midwest. And I said, you've had these very interesting experiences about creating these tax-free enterprise zones, and we have all the assets for the next generation batteries in this part of the country. You know, Argonne, University of Michigan. I said, do you think we ought to set up an enterprise zone for a battery manufacturing cluster in the Midwest? And you know what they all said? You can't do that. And I said, why? They said, because you're not a developing country. You're not allowed to do that. I thought, well, you do it.
That's great.
Questions?
Cecilia Bryan, Jacksonville, Florida. First of all, economics is humor. This is a revelation for me. I want to thank you. I love revelations. First, a comment, 18-word comment. Rather than more fiscal stimulus at the federal level, we could enact policies that open the spigot of individual and corporate savings. Just a thought. The question is, it goes back to your stimulus comment, and the first stimulus bill had a high percentage of money spent on soft programs, rather than on the shovel-ready we've heard so much about. What mechanisms will the new $450 billion stimulus plan put in place to ensure that the money allocated is actually spent on infrastructure projects?
There are two questions there. Deborah, why don't you take the cash question? The first issue was, well, these companies are sitting on all this cash. Why isn't that the source of stimulus? And Jared, you take the shovel-ready question.
The reason the private sector's cash that they're sitting on is not part of stimulus, as it should be, is uncertainty. I mean, whether a few years ago we're going to have cap and trade, cap and tax, all this stuff. And two, that the capital cost and regulatory structure here almost forces them to invest where the growing markets are, which are outside of this country. And they're not here right now. So it's going to be very hard to get them to invest unless we change some of the things that I tried to articulate.
One thing I learned it's a good question, by the way, and well put. One thing I learned during the Recovery Act, I worked for the Vice President at the time, he was kind of implementer-in-chief, is that the most direct measures were the most successful. I mean, they kind of knew what they were doing back there with the New Deal when they just directly hire a bunch of people to build something big. But for a variety of reasons, we don't do direct job creation the way we used to. But we got pretty close. So for example, one of the best ideas in the jobs plan is something the President has been traveling the country trying to push, but Congress has resisted, is basically direct hires of teachers and first responders, teachers, police, firefighters. In fact, every month when, we're going to get these numbers tomorrow, every month when we get our jobs report, we learn that we're adding private sector jobs. Not enough, but 2.5 million since the spring of 2010. We're shedding public sector jobs every month. 400,000 over the last 18 months or so. That's because states are forced to balance their budgets and they're facing a real crunch right now. So the closer we get to direct job creation, whether it's on infrastructure or in this case, keeping public sector workers on the job, is the biggest bang for the jobs buck.
I apologize to the two of you. I told me only get one more question and take it from over.
Good afternoon. I have a quick question about student loan interest rates. Last week, the president announced that there was going to be a 25 basis point reduction, and if you elected to have an EFT, you're going to have another 25 basis point reduction. But if you look at my student loan rates year after year, in 2005 they were 2.1%. In 2010, it was 6.8%. Am I supposed to be thankful that he reduced the interest rates?
Sounds like you have some student debt.
I have about 50,000, and I have a good job, and I'm paying back my loans as quickly as possible. But to my peers who have $120,000 worth of debt and no job, and they're told in 20 years their debt will be forgiven, is that really sustainable for the country?
6% sounds awfully high. Who wants to take that on? Come on, you're Mr. Interest Rate.
I have no idea how the rates are set on those folks.
Okay.
So
I would talk to your alma mater. I don't know what it was. What's interesting, again, this goes back to their say quality. When it used to be that college costs rose about in line with everything else. As soon as we started subsidizing education, college costs went up a lot faster than everything else. In fact, college costs have been going up per year about 4% faster than the overall price level. This is at a time when a high-tech business like university education should have been going the other way. Well, guess what happened, right? You subsidize something, the guys who are selling it, who, by the way, operate a cartel in pricing and on college scholarship aid, started jacking up prices because we were subsidizing them to jack up prices. Okay, guys, let's rethink the whole thing.
this must have started with the land-grant colleges in 1865.
That was actually a capital cost.
Unfortunately, Rick Levin is gone now, so we won't be able to get that question back.
Well, he didn't know that student interest rates were that high.
You told him.
I asked him about that, and he said he did not know. And I said, well, that's scary.
Well, I hate to do this to bring this panel to a close because it's been so stimulating, but thank them very much again.